Thank you. Okay, why don't we get started here? Hello, welcome to the Student Conservation Research Proposal presentations. I'm Robert Rose, the Executive Director of the Institute for Integrative Conservation. I'm joined here virtually this afternoon by John Swaddle, Faculty Director, Kathy Francillo, Administrative Coordinator, Craig Anzalone, Development Director, and Jasmine Dix, our Communications and Marketing Assistant, who has really helped organize today's event. Today, 10 undergraduate students from W&M will present their proposals for conservation research they will complete this summer alongside conservation partners and faculty members as part of a year-long conservation research program supported by the IIC and the Charles Center. Before we begin, I would like to thank our advisory board and steering committee for the support and feedback. Also, I would like to thank the conservation partners, faculty mentors, Dan Crystal, who has been the lead from the Charles Center, and the students for all your hard work on these applied conservation research projects. Also, I would like to thank you all for joining us today to support these fantastic students. This is a two-part event. The other half of the students in the Conservation Research Program, whose projects have a strong GIS component, will be presenting their proposals as part of the Geospatial Research Symposium this Friday. That is hosted by the Center for Geospatial Analysis and the IIC. We encourage you to register for this symposium, and we will put the registration link in the chat shortly. The William & Mary Sustainability Symposium will be held next week on April 20th and 21st. Organized by the Office of Sustainability, the IIC and several other William & Mary departments have collaborated on this symposium. It is focused on exploring our interconnectedness and will feature two keynote speakers, Celine Cousteau and Winona LeDuc. Please register for this event, and we will also put this registration link in the chat. Launched in January of 2020, the Institute for Integrative Conservation is a new integrative approach to conservation at William & Mary and beyond. Our mission is to cultivate an inclusive community of creative leaders to deliver innovative solutions to the world's most pressing conservation challenges. We achieve this mission by bringing together global expertise, diverse perspectives, and an entrepreneurial mindset to address emerging issues in a rapidly changing international environment. We also hope to strengthen the connections among people, communities, and nature to prepare the next generation of bold, compassionate, and principled conservationists to adapt and respond quickly to challenges as they arise. When we speak of an integrative approach, we like to use this diagram to kind of show what that means. It's in part an establishment of a strong internal and external network where we are able to integrate across disciplines and sectors, connecting William & Mary internal expertise with conservation partners to advance global conservation. We will collaborate with conservation NGOs, federal, state, and local agencies, international governments, other universities, private corporations, indigenous governments and communities, and local communities to advance global conservation. We also intend to integrate across disciplines and knowledge systems. Our goal is to bring together people from all over campus, including the Law and Business School, Marine Sciences and Education, as well as Arts and Sciences, to partner with our external conservation partners to find solutions to pressing conservation challenges. What you are watching today are presentations as part of our conservation research program. This is student research that is the foundation of our work that enables us to meet our objectives. This is a year-long program that engages students in applied, integrative research projects to address real-world conservation challenges. Students work on projects that have been identified by conservation partners and are designed to support these partners in advancing real-world conservation outcomes. We identify a suite of interdisciplinary projects that focus on the various integrative aspects of conservation. Projects that focus on education, sustainable livelihoods, social sciences, ecological research, new technologies, and other areas of interest. This year-long program starts this spring, where students work alongside conservation partners and faculty mentors to develop a research proposal as part of a course. They will then conduct research in the summer with a stipend from the IIC and the Charles Center and complete a report of their work the following fall semester. Students meet weekly with their conservation partners and faculty members to ensure that research applies to improve conservation outcomes. Through this program, students not only gain valuable research experience, but through collaboration with partners, they gain professional skills and learn about careers in the conservation field firsthand. This program enables us to achieve our objectives to build a network of conservation partners, to support the advancement of integrative solutions to global challenges, and to build the next generation of conservation leaders. This afternoon, 10 students in the Conservation Research Program will be presenting proposals for the research they will complete this summer, alongside conservation partners and faculty members. They will give a 5-minute presentation, and we will have time for questions from the audience. We encourage questions as this will help the students refine their research and will help them prepare for their summer work. All attendees' mics will be turned off during the event, and the event is being recorded. If you would like to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and John Swaddle will be asking the questions of each of the students. So we will turn to our first student today, Sophie Pitaluga. She's speaking on gender and conservation, aiming for equality and improved climate outcomes. The external partner is Planet Women, and the faculty mentor is John Swaddle.
Can you all see my screen all right?
Yep.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Sophie Pitaluga, and I'm going to be talking about my research proposal on gender and conservation. And before I get started, I wanted to thank Professor Swaddle and the Planet Women team for their guidance and support during this process, because you all have been incredible mentors. And I wanted to start with a case study about Colombian women in the blue-billed Curassow. In this case study, we saw that educational efforts and the empowerment of women at the center of conservation initiatives can have significant and positive conservation outcomes. So 2 organizations, Women for Conservation and Fundación Pro Aves, worked together with the community of Puerto Pinzón to restore the blue-billed Curassow population in the region, where deforestation destroyed 98% of the bird's habitat, which obviously put the species in peril. So workshops were hosted to raise awareness about the bird, and lifestyle changing initiatives were launched. For example, women were taught to collect tagua nuts, which could be used to make jewelry and other sellable goods. And this replaced their dependence on cattle ranching, one of the main culprits of deforestation. Also, a group of local women started a tree nursery for native species, which acted as a model for the community, but also served as an opportunity to teach propagation methods and the importance of reforestation. So through these efforts, the community has seen the blue-billed Curaçao's population rebound, which is absolutely incredible. And this is what my research seeks to further explore, how women's leadership can have a positive impact on the protection of life on Earth. And I wanted to start by mapping out the conservation challenge, because at the broadest level, we continue to see underrepresentation of women in most sectors and at most hierarchical levels. And we see this even more among Black, Indigenous, and people of color who identify as women or BIPOC women. In fact, around 60% of conservation scientists identify as male, and 92% of them are white, which means a fraction of conservation scientists are women of color, excluding incredibly important and valuable voices at all levels, but especially at the leadership level. Yet at the same time, women are heavily involved in conservation work. They're primary stakeholders in conservation and stewards of nature, which makes them disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. They're responsible for collecting water for their families and villages, and they tend to important sources of food, including playing an important role in farms and fisheries. And moreover, women are thought to interact with nature differently and have the potential to deal with conflict and collaborate more effectively than men. So in this sense, women are a great value addition because they bring a different approach and perspective to the conservation conversation. And with all of this in mind, what do we already know? Because there is research on gender and conservation with case studies on projects conducted around the world. But we want more. We want more research on the existing gender inequity that can prove a stronger need for aiming for and working towards equality. However, not much of the current literature focuses on the intersectionality of gender and race when discussing gender equity, which is what I plan on honing in on. And on top of that, while underscoring the issue is important to bring attention to this conservation challenge, we're looking for actionable steps organizations can take to move closer to equity. Which brings us to this project's relevancy. And I wanted to look at this through two lenses, the justice lens and the economic lens. From an environmental justice perspective, having a more diverse group of people meaningfully involved in conservation increases the multitude of decision-making voices that exist. Also, diversity is set to increase creativity and could lead to the development of more innovative solutions, which is what we desperately need to properly address climate change and conservation issues. We also recognize that women's rights are human rights, and everyone should have the opportunity and choice to work towards a better future, especially when something shared, our Earth, is at stake. Through an economic lens, we know that by giving women more educational and professional opportunities, we can increase overall economic growth. Moreover, by giving women more autonomy and power, they become more effective stewards of natural resources and can possibly take a more active leadership role in conservation efforts. In fact, 90% of rice cultivation labor force in Southeast Asia is comprised of women. They know the land, they know the best practices, and thus they can be the ones leading the implementation of sustainable and conservation forward processes. I plan on addressing this pressing conservation issue in three ways. First, I want to provide more research on the lack of gender equity in conservation to further investigate the existence of the issue with a greater focus on gender and race. Then I would like to hear from conservationists who are working with gender diverse teams to see if this leads to more productive conservation outcomes. And my own research will be supplemented by Ann Turner's interviews, a student researcher who you'll be hearing from next. And finally, a lot of the existing literature doesn't offer solutions to working towards equity. The last part of my research seeks to look into the steps other fields such as public health and the business sector have taken to address gender inequity head on. And we hope that these findings will have a real impact on making conservation a more diverse, inclusive, and flourishing environment. And more generally, I personally hope that by inviting, including, and wanting women to participate in conservation, we can all work towards a greener and cleaner Earth, restoring what's been lost while empowering those whose voices have long been ignored, which in the end will benefit all life on Earth. Thank you. And if you have any questions, ask away.
So if you have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. You could also stick them in the chat. I'm monitoring both as well. So as people are getting ready to type, I'll ask Sophia first question to get people going. So do you feel that there are particular industry areas or sectors that might be good models for improving gender equity that we could then use to learn from and apply to conservation in some form?
Yeah, so we've been talking about potentially looking at the public health sector and the business or private sector, because we know that in the public health sector, a lot of women are employed because traditionally, like, health is kind of seen as maybe having more women involved. And then the business sector has taken really impactful strides into trying to achieve equity. So those are two fields we're kind of talking about right now, but there's definitely room to explore over the summer and see if there are other industries that may have done better than, say, public health or the business sector. So we're still kind of open to that, exploring that.
Wonderful. I've got another question from the chat. Are there particular solutions that you're already looking at to improve equity? For example, perhaps you're going to target school-aged girls, people already in the profession, for example?
Yeah, that's mostly going to be what I'm going to be focusing on over the summer. But I know I've done some preliminary research and read a couple of papers that talk about various models that can be applied specifically in the business sector. So now it's kind of seeing if these models can be applied to conservation as well. I think education is a great way of doing it because you're starting to explore an issue at a very young age. And obviously it's easier to adapt as you get older if you're instilled with certain values. So that may be an area we explore. But again, this is something we're going to be looking at over the summer. So definitely things to keep in mind. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I might jump in and ask a question until another one comes up in the chat, if any others come up. Sophie, I'm curious if you think, I know your research is focused on women in conservation, but do you envision that what you learn and what you show out of this work could be applied to other underrepresented groups in conservation?
I hope so. I think I'm definitely trying to look at gender through a very intersectional lens because I feel like those identities kind of work together to influence a person's experiences and opportunities. So by looking at race and gender, I hope to kind of make it a more inclusive, inclusive research. And then obviously I don't know. I hope that my findings will be applicable to other identities and possibly even other fields if we find something super stellar. But I guess we'll kind of see as the research goes on.
Excellent. Any more questions, John?
Yeah, I think there's one more question. I think we've got
Okay.
time for one more question. How would you select the sample for gender and conservation interventions that you'd look at? For example, you may want to discuss a sampling strategy with your partners to define a manageable sample. So in terms of who you would talk to, who would you interview, how far have you got into thinking about who you're going to interact with to gain the information over the summer?
Right, I think it's a really wonderful question. I know as of now, I have 3 lists of people working in the public health field, in the business sector, and in conservation who are primarily women and women of color who work with gender in their various fields. So I think talking to them about maybe progress that they've seen in the public health and business sectors, and then also how conservationists see women as an asset to having better conservation outcomes could be a good way to approach this. But more questions will be narrowed down throughout the summer along with the people that we're interviewing. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Sophie. Wonderful job.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Up next, we have Ann Turner, who will be presenting her work on season 2 of the Conservation Stories podcast, Women in Conservation. Ann's faculty member is Dorothy Ebis.
Hi, can everyone see my screen all right?
We're not quite seeing your slides yet.
Let me try to share them again.
There we go. Looks good.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Turner, and I'm a double major in biology and environmental science and policy, and I'm so excited to share my project proposal for a podcast that dives into the stories of women in the field of conservation with you all today. But before we get started, I would love to thank my co-producer, Professor Ibez, and the team at Planet Woman for their insight and support during this process. So while gender equality is recognized as a human right by the United Nations, we seem to be falling short of this in the workplace, especially when it comes to conservation. A recent study out of Colorado State University interviewed 56 women conservation leaders, and every single one of them reported experiencing a gender-related challenge in their careers, with a vast majority encountering challenges in 4 out of the 6 research categories, which were salary inequity, formal exclusion, informal exclusion, harassment and inadequate organizational response, assumptions of inadequacy, and assumptions of wrongness. Additionally, we continue to see the underrepresentation of women in most sectors in higher level positions, and we see this even more among Black, Indigenous, and people of color who identify as women. Also, specifically relating to conservation, 30% of the workforce is female and 90% of the entire workforce is white. This gender disparity is leading to the loss of really important voices in the conservation discussion because women use, value, interact with, and understand nature differently than men. So if we aren't given a seat at the table, then a whole perspective and approach to conservation is lost. This topic is so important because a more diverse workplace is a more productive workplace. The inclusion of women will increase the efficacy of conservation efforts, and the more voices that exist, the more holistically an issue can be addressed. Additionally, diversity in the workplace has been shown to increase happiness, profits, and productivity of an organization. So last year, the IIC created the first season of the Conservation Stories podcast to connect listeners to nature through inspirational personal narratives from diverse voices in conservation. The previous season was created by Anna Kay, and Professor Ibis is the ongoing faculty member on the project. It consisted of 3 15 to 20-minute episodes named The Past, Present, and the Future that told the story of the Pamunkey tribe in the Chesapeake Bay, their relationship with the land, and how they are addressing climate change. For the second season, we wanted to have the podcast elevate the voices of women in conservation by sharing their stories and raise awareness about the need for gender equity, along with promoting actions that break down these barriers within the field. A couple sub-goals are we also want to highlight just in general the gender disparity in the field of conservation, inspire and support women that are entering and advancing in the field of conservation, and to highlight the particular perspectives women offer the field of conservation. And the target audience for this podcast is the broader conservation community, especially the leaders in the conservation field who can use this podcast to raise awareness and start thinking about ways that they can break down gender inequity in the conservation field. So the podcast this season will also consist of 3 episodes, each about 15 to 20 minutes long, and each episode is going to highlight a woman from a different facet of conservation so that we can include a wide range of voices that can provide a unique perspective to each of our listeners. Throughout the remainder of the semester, I will be interviewing a woman that does field work, a woman in a managerial / project lead position, and a CEO of an environmental organization. Each of these interviews will be conducted through Zoom, and they'll be about an hour in length. Being able to work with Planet Women has been extremely beneficial because they've been able to provide me with a fantastic list of potential contacts for this interview. One of these contacts was Nicole Esters, and you can see her headshot in the middle of the slide. She has worked with Conservation International for the past 15 years on policy and marine management projects, and she began in the organization as a research assistant, but now she is a senior director of development. Having held a wide range of roles and positions, she was able to provide insight of what it is like to move through the ranks of an organization, as well as provide suggestions as how to empower and provide women with the tools to get into these upper level positions. I had the pleasure of talking with Nicole last week, and I cannot wait to release her podcast episode. She dove into her travels and about gender norms outside of the US, the harmful nature of imposter syndrome, and the importance of mentorship in the empowerment of women. To facilitate these interviews, Professor Ibis and I formulated a list of about 8 main questions to ask each interviewee. These questions may include some follow-up questions, or the interview may warrant an off-script follow-up response, but each of these 8 key questions will be asked during each interview. So I ask, what motivated you to work in conservation? Do you notice gender inequities in the conservation profession? Have you personally experienced gender inequity during your career? What is needed to break down the barriers to more women joining and advancing in the field of conservation? Have you noticed conservation became more inclusive since you began? What recommendations would you have to help and encourage women to enter the conservation profession? And how can we help them move into leadership positions? If we improve gender equity in conservation, what benefits do you think we would see for the profession and for conservation on the ground? And is there anything important that you would like to add to this discussion? Because often the most insightful comments come from something that's a little more open-ended. So after conducting these interviews, we will begin the editing process to turn this content into a cohesive podcast, and this will primarily be done during the summer of 2021, which is just a few months away. It'll consist of many hours of listening and re-listening to the footage, creating transcriptions of the audio, editing sound files for clarity, creating episode introductions, and deciding on the most compelling responses to turn these hour-long interviews into 15 to 20-minute podcasts. I will primarily be editing the audio through the Adobe suite, namely Adobe Audition, and we are shooting to have the master copy of each podcast completed by the end of the summer, and then they will be released through the fall. And then additionally, in the fall, it will consist of me working closely with Planet Women to market the episodes to help increase the scope of our viewership. We really hope that this series will help create conversations about equity in the workplace and give tangible suggestions on how employers and companies can create an environment that welcomes diversity, including the IAC. A side goal for the podcast was to help the IAC advance strategic objectives to improve the diversity of the conservation field. This podcast will also help further my peer Sophie's research by providing a first-person viewpoint on the barriers contributing to a lack of diversity in the workplace, as there isn't a wealth of primary sources on the topic. And by elevating voices of women in conservation, I also hope that conservation stories will inspire other young women to enter the field and encourage established members of the community to offer mentorship to empower and give new hirees the tools to move into upper management positions. But most importantly, inviting women into the space and empowering their voices will improve environmental outcomes, benefiting all life on the planet and bringing us closer to Mother Earth. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Anne. So we have a question or two already in the chat box, which is great. Sorry, in the Q&A box. So here's one question. Everyone loves podcasts now. What about podcasts make them such a potent and popular form of communication? Why is podcasting a good medium for your research and message?
I think that podcasting is a great medium for this effort because it's something that you can just put on and listen to whenever you have the time. I know a lot of my friends now, they're off doing careers outside of college, and they'll just have a list of podcasts that they go through on their drive to work. So I think it's a medium that's really accessible and that'll be able to reach a large audience.
I've got one other question. How will the podcasts be archived and distributed for maximum impact? And who do you want to listen? Who do you want as listeners to the podcast? Any particular thoughts on that?
So the podcast, the current season is available on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and it's hosted on Podbean. So you can find it by just searching Conservation Stories by the IAC through Google. And this season of the podcast will also be hosted on the same platform, so you'll be able to find it there. Ideally, we want this podcast to be as accessible as possible, so it's really going to be marketed towards anyone that would like to listen to it. So hopefully students and faculty here will give it a listen, and we also hope that it'll reach people in the conservation sector, like possibly higher ups, who will be able to use the information that we talk about with the interviewees to really expand diversity within their workplace.
Rob, you have a question for Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I can't wait to hear this new podcast season. I'm curious, when you go through the interviews and you begin asking those questions, at the end of each question, do you ask follow-up questions? Do you have time to expand and explore some of the topics that they dug into? Or do you stay pretty close to the questions as you ask them?
Yeah, for each podcast, just for consistency, we definitely want to get all 8 questions asked to each interviewee, but as of the first interview that I had with Nicole, there's definitely time to go off script and ask some follow-up questions that pertain to what the conversation is leading to, and it really helps expand on the ideas that they're trying to convey.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Anne. Great job. And I think we will move on to the next person.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anne. Next up, we have Madeline Bertagnoli. She's presenting a development and implementation of FCAT's business plan. The partner is Fundación para la Conservación de los Andes Tropicales, and also partnered with Tulane University, and the faculty mentor is Graham Henshaw.
Madeline, you're still muted, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's really important. As Robert just introduced, my name is Madeline. I'm a junior at the college majoring in business analytics and environmental policy. So I'm really excited to intertwine these two things together with the development of this business plan with FCAT. Okay, first I'd like to introduce FCAT. FCAT is a nonprofit located in the northwestern portion of the Los Andes Tropicales of Ecuador. Its mission is to reduce deforestation, restore Ecuador's rainforests, conserve endangered species and their habitats, all with the help and support from the local Ecuadorian communities. The Los Andes Tropicales of Ecuador is in dire help. It is a biodiversity hotspot. It is currently being deforested from the locals as they have no other economic alternatives to using this land. So a lot of the locals will cut down the forest and use it for cattle production or produce cocoa. So we want to engage these locals in a different capacity that doesn't engage in deforestation, but also promotes them economically. So we came up with this problem statement. FCAT is exploring the opportunities for alternative livelihood strategies that will reduce deforestation, promote local livelihoods and commitment to forest conservation, and will ensure the long-term sustainability of FCAT initiatives. When I first came onto this project, FCAT already had the idea in mind of sustainable vanilla production. And this would engage the locals by allowing them to have a greenhouse right next to their house instead of using their hectare plots to promote deforestation with cocoa or cattle. We're gonna have a small section on the side of their house for vanilla production. However, after further prodding and I guess investigation, we began to think, is this the best solution to engage these locals and promote conservation? So I began to look at other possible solutions such as ecotourism, sustainable fishing, and other sustainable farming methods that are used in Ecuador. And I came up with the following criteria to assess these: timeline and revenue. Will this generate revenue in a timely manner for FCAT and the locals involved? Mission alignment. Does this align with FCAT's mission that I previously stated? The degree of complexity, how many moving parts are there going to be in this? The involvement of local stakeholders, how is the Ecuadorian community going to be involved in this? And also, does this develop them economically? And lastly, and I think most importantly, forest conservation. Will this stop deforestation and promote conservation? So we came up with the following objectives. First, a literature review, which I'll conduct research on alternative solutions and what makes these effective. And then I'm going to explore these solutions using the previously stated criteria to kind of grade them, in which you can decide what will be the best solution and what should I make my business model off of. And then the next one is going to be developing a business model. I first came onto the project thinking of a business plan, but after further investigation, we thought a business model would be better for this because it's more interactive and flexible because the current changes and everything like that. And this also has a lot of moving parts that need to be constantly changed and readdressed in this climate. These moving parts will be key partnerships, resources, value proposition, customer relationship, customer segments, channels, and a lot of crazy business things that I'm learning in the business school right now that I'm able to apply. And lastly, implementing this business model in whatever means FCAT sees necessary. Lastly, these methods really align with the objectives I previously stated. I'm going to do a lot of background research using vast resources such as the William & Mary libraries. I went to the business school for research, and also Google Scholar, and also using assessment of these strategies using a chart analysis and discussion with my conservation partners, the development of the business model using Business Canva, and implementing this plan. And this plan will definitely be dependent upon what is chosen for our solution. And at the end of this, I hope to produce and implement an interactive business model that promotes sustainability, engages the local community, aligns with FCAT's mission, and conserves the Los Andes Tropicales forest. And you're probably wondering why a William & Mary student is so involved with a local nonprofit in Ecuador, but it's really important for the planet health. Conserving the rainforest is really important for climate change because rainforests are seen as the lungs of the earth. They take out CO2. This is really important now, as we can see with global climate change. And also rainforests are a biodiversity hotspot. in the Los Andes tropical forest alone, there's over 45,000 plants, 3,000 plus animals. And also deforestation is an issue that's happening now. It's not something in the future. In the area that FCAT is located, I believe it's called the Chew Forest, it's already 90% deforested. So we want to solve this solution as soon as possible. And also I want to help promote the economic well-being of the locals, and maybe my alternative solution I come up with can be used elsewhere across the world to stop deforestation. Does anyone have any questions? And thank you for your patience, I guess.
Great job, Madeline. So we do have a question in the Q&A box. You contrasted a business model and a business plan as you were talking. Can you say a little bit about the difference between the two, and why did you tell us a little bit more about why you chose the business plan?
Yeah, so after coming up with a solution, in my first meeting with Graham, he was like, you really need to look at the business model. And he gave me this link to Business Canva, and this is online interactive website in which like a business plan is usually put forth and then you go engage in it, but business model is more interactive and flexible throughout the summer, because I'm thinking with the solution we choose, there's probably going to be a lot of like, I guess, challenges that we need to address and readdress. So business model allows you to interact with it and change for all these different, I guess, moving parts. Well, business plan is kind of like putting forth in the beginning and then you enact it.
Is there a different approach at all that you take when thinking about working with a conservation NGO as opposed to a sort of a profit-making business as you put together a plan?
For sure. I definitely think Graham has this in mind, in which the first meeting, it's kind of like we want to make profit to buy more conservation land, but also we have the main goal of sustainability and economic development. And this wouldn't really be a sustainable research project if I wasn't promoting economic development and promoting sustainability. So I think, as I addressed earlier, the criteria that is most important to me, and I think also my conservation partners, is stopping deforestation.
Great. So I've got another question from the Q&A. So is there any way for you to talk with people on the ground or experts in the community that could offer some alternative solutions that might not appear in the literature? So in other words, how connected are you to the people in Ecuador to help you put together this plan?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge I have faced. I was able to find another nonprofit they're in the northeastern part, another part of Ecuador that is already engaging in sustainable vanilla, and I was able to reach out with them via LinkedIn. But I think it's kind of challenging because I'm not in Ecuador and I don't have these connections with everyone else. And also I do not speak Spanish, so that itself is a language barrier. But I'm still able to use my conservation partners, and they're able to reach out to people. And also I know Jordan has connections within other sustainable farming. But I think that is definitely a challenge, not being there, but also the language barrier as well.
Great, and it's so important to have those on the ground connections, which is fantastic. One last question, I think, in terms of startup costs or opportunity costs for some of the things that you might generate through your plan. Like some activities like ecotourism might generate revenue, but sometimes there's large startup costs associated with that. Are those sort of upfront initiation costs sort of factored into the plan that you're developing or will be developing?
Yeah, actually with ecotourism, I know we're kind of like going deeper and deeper into our solutions we thought of, but I know they have a grant in which they're going to try to use this to start up costs for ecotourism. But for other ones, I'll really need to implement the business model and proposing a couple grants to like start the business. But I know they do have a little bit of money for certain ventures already that they said they could use for some of the startup, depending on the solution.
Great. Thank you so much, Madeline.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madeline. That was fantastic. I really look forward to seeing the outcome of this. Up next, we have Jordan Bryant. Jordan's working on an 18-year analysis of vegetation plots in Inknart, Mongolia. The conservation partner is the Mongolian Conservation Coalition, and Jordan's mentor is Erica Garut, the IIC program manager.
All right, is everyone able to see my slides?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. My name is Jordan Bryant. I am a sophomore here at the college, and I am majoring in biology with a possible double major in environmental science as well. And this year, I have been working with the Mongolian Conservation Coalition, as well as the IIC's program manager, Erica Garut, to work on this project, which is really exploring the changes in both the vegetation diversity and vegetation cover in relation to livestock and climate changes that we've seen in Icknart Nature Reserve in Mongolia. All right, so just a little bit of background about Mongolia, because I feel like it's not a country that a lot of people know a lot about, and I certainly didn't before I started this project. The first thing that most people think of when thinking about Mongolia is that it was once the home to the infamous Genghis Khan. But nowadays, it's really known well in the conservation community, mostly because it has some of the largest intact grasslands that exist anywhere in the world today. And so this is really important from a conservation perspective because it houses a lot of unique species that exist nowhere else in the world. And it's also home to nomadic herders that are really essential and a huge part of the cultural identity of Mongolia. And in addition to this, the nomadic herders are about half of the population of Mongolia. So Mongolia is about 3 million people, and half of those people live in the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. And the other half are nomadic herders that populate the rest of the country. And what that means is that they tend to move around based on which grasslands are the most productive for their livestock. So they have goats and sheep and cattle, as well as horses and even some camels in there as well. But recently we've been seeing a pretty big increase in the number of livestock numbers. And what this means for the country as a whole is that about 70% of Mongolia's rangelands are classified as degraded, which is a pretty significant thing, both for the biodiversity of the country as well as the herders themselves. And so my research is focused on one of many nature reserves in Mongolia called Icknart. It's the one circled in blue here. And Icknart is a really unique nature reserve in the country that was founded about 2 decades ago and is comprised of 66 hectares of grassland and semi-desert steppe ecosystems. And it houses a lot of endangered and threatened species, as well as 150 nomadic herding families. So the reason that we're interested in exploring the vegetation changes in Icknart both has ecological and social implications. From a social perspective, as I discussed before, we're really interested in preserving the nomadic herders' way of life because it's really essential to the cultural identity of Mongolia as a whole, and it's also essential for the livelihood of these families. From an ecological perspective, we really want to conserve these grasslands in order to better conserve the species that live there. If we better understand how the grasslands are changing, then we can better implement rangeland management strategies to protect those species as well. And so over the last 20 or so years, research has been done in Icknart by the Mongolian Conservation Coalition, as well as the Denver Zoo and some other partners, into the impacts of increased livestock as well as changes in climate in the nature reserve. What we've found is that with the increase in livestock numbers, there is an increased degradation of the land. And in particular, what we found is that the number of palatable species in the grasslands decreases as grazing increases, which has effects both for the livestock and for the Argali sheep. From a climate perspective, what we're interested in is the increase in droughts that are occurring in the park. And with an increase in droughts, we see a decrease in the quantity or the biomass of vegetation. And of course, with a decrease in the biomass of the vegetation, the grasslands can't sustain as large of a population of either livestock or Argali sheep. And so with all of this background knowledge in mind, we've come up with 2 major objectives for this research that we will be doing this year. And the first objective has to do with determining just how the grassland cover and the species diversity have varied both spatially throughout the park as well as temporally between 2002 and 2020. So we have 18 years of data to go through to determine what trends we're seeing. And based on that, our second objective is going to be to determine what factors might be explaining these variations that we see, both from a spatial point of view as well as the temporal. And so how are we doing this? What data do we have? So the Mongolian Conservation Coalition has been monitoring 36 plots between 2002 and 2020. And basically what that means is that on an annual basis, the researchers go out to each of these plots and measure both what species are there and the cover of those species within the plot, so how much area each of those species are taking up, as well as other factors like the biomass of the vegetation, the height of the vegetation, and some other things as well. And so what I'll be doing with that data is analyzing two major things. The first thing that I will be analyzing is just the change in species composition, or what species we're seeing in those plots. So are we seeing a general decrease in the number of species in those plots? Are certain species decreasing, but others are increasing? Things like that. And then the second thing that I'll be looking at is how the percent composition of those have changed as well. So are some species really starting to dominate the landscape? Or importantly, are we seeing an increased percent of bare ground, which could be a really important indicator of the health of the vegetation and the grassland as a whole? And so this has some pretty significant outcomes for stakeholders on the ground in Mongolia. And with that in mind, once my summer analysis has been completed, I'll be doing a presentation to the stakeholders in Mongolia to basically just present what findings I have, and so that they can compare what the data is telling them with what they have been observing over the last 20 or so years. And from that, they can determine what kinds of rangeland management strategies they want to implement in the future, given the information that we determine. The second thing that we'll be doing is writing a manuscript, which will help provide a basis for future research onto the effects of both climate and livestock and how we can better conserve this land, both in Ignart and in Mongolia as a whole. And so I just want to say thank you again to my project partners and take any questions that you guys might have for me.
Nicely done, Jordan. So we do have a question in the Q&A box. Are you taking into account the changes expected in the future, such as climate change or population growth, increasingly middle class, sedentary populations, when thinking about your data and how it can be interpreted and implemented?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It is not directly part of my project goals, but it will certainly help to inform those decisions. So part of what I'll be doing is, once I kind of lay out what trends we're seeing, we're going to kind of overlay that with what years we've seen in the last 18 years that have had droughts. And so with the knowledge that as climate change continues, we're going to see an increase in drought in this region, we can use that data to see, okay, well, this is what happened in the past when droughts happened, and how can we predict what's going to happen with that grassland in the future based on that. But it's not a direct part of my project, is determining what's going to happen in the future.
Rob, you got a question for Jordan?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jordan. Really interesting work. I'm curious, with such an extensive data set on grassland productivity covering 20 years, there's a real opportunity here to go beyond some of the work here and think about how grasslands can be studied using other tools like remote sensing. It's an area that's been very difficult for remote sensing, in part because there's no data like this. So I'm wondering if either through this project or there's other opportunities to take this data in an additional direction that looks at how remote sensing tools can be used to understand grassland productivity around the world.
I definitely think there's a lot of potential for projects like that. For what our plan is for the summer is, first we're going to be completing the two analyses that I talked about at the beginning or during the presentation. And then From there, we have a few ideas of what we might continue to look at if given more time during the summer, if I'm able to complete the analysis in a timely manner. And one of them has been to look at the types of landscapes that we see within the park and comparing that to the types of vegetation that we're seeing. And so there's definitely a potential there to use some remote sensing data. So that's definitely something that could potentially come down the line.
Excellent.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Jordan. So up next, we have Hannah Dahl, birds, windows, and smartphones. Hannah's partner is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and faculty mentor is John Swaddle.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen really quick. All right. Hi, my name is Hannah Dahl, and I'm here to talk to you about birds, windows, and smartphones, and also why birds care about the apps that you download. I'd like to thank my external conservation partner, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but specifically Eric Kirshner and Joel Gearing for their help, and also my IIC mentor, John Swaddle. So getting started, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with in recent years, the conspiracy theory that birds are not real, but it's gained a lot of momentum over the past, I don't know, 3 years or so. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, some people believe that birds are drones that are here to spy on us from the government, and there's just a lot of fun ideas with that. I can confidently say, though, from my knowledge of birds, that birds are real, which is a good thing, but also that if they are real, then they have some real threats to them. And those real threats, one of those, are windows. And so I'm willing to bet that just about everyone here has at some point or another either seen or heard a bird hit their window, or seen a pile of feathers outside the building or outside their own window, or even the bird itself. And it's really gruesome and really terrible. And according to the American Bird Conservancy, or the ABC, up to 1 billion birds per year die from window collisions in the US alone, which is a huge, huge number, even if that's the upper end of it. And so one huge reason that birds collide with windows is just because they can't see them when they're flying, which is really tragic. But windows tend to reflect the light that's around them. And so if it only shows the sky from a high rise, or if it shows the grass and trees and other vegetation around your home, then birds think that they have a clear path of flight, and they end up just smacking right into it. And there's no way that they are able to help themselves with that because they're just being birds. And so this is a large scale problem, but we can help. And I say we because this definitely involves each of us. And so this summer, in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the ultimate end product of my research will be an app that helps you assess the risk of the windows in your home or wherever you live, to how unsafe it is for birds to run into based on how reflective it is, or what vegetation you have around, or what have you. And the app that we will be designing will also help give you solutions that minimize that risk of bird window collisions. And so what I have to focus on this summer are these questions. First, what resources are already out there? One specifically that I'll be looking at is called Flap App Canada. And so Flap App has a similar goal to what we want, is the reduction of bird window collisions, but they do it in a slightly different way than we're wanting to do it. So I'll be looking at that. And then from what I find there, I'm going to be asking the question, how do we make what's out there better? And that will involve making an app that is comprehensive and also very straightforward, that helps you find the solutions to bird-friendly windows, and making those options really easy to find and very accessible for all people, because it's not always as intuitive as you think. And so how do I plan on doing this? Pretty simple. I'm just going to be reading a lot of stuff. And so for the first part, I'm going to be comparing Flap App Canada to the American Bird Conservancy website, to other resources such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website, and just figuring out what works and what doesn't, what is straightforward and what's streamlined and what really needs work. And then from that research that I'll be doing, I'll be moving into creating a risk assessment questionnaire and then the solutions that will be provided as a part of that with the app for future app users. And so the way that I'm going to get to making that questionnaire and producing those solutions are through large-scale surveys of the population and targeted bird groups that already want to help, and also talking to the experts, seeing what they have to say, and reading the existing literature about bird window collisions, because there's actually a lot that has already been done. There's so much work that doesn't need to be repeated, but that kind of needs to be condensed and brought together. So if you didn't get any of that, just know I will be doing lots of reading, lots of writing, lots of Zoom call interviews and phone calls and emails, and I'll be connecting a bunch of different groups of people to figure out what are the answers that we need. And so don't worry, I won't be bored. And so you've heard me talk for a little bit now, but let's rein it all in. Why does creating an app about birds, about windows even matter? Why should it matter to you? Well, birds are an integral part of our ecosystems, and they're so important, and they're also beautiful, and we love to watch them and to listen to them, and all sorts of things. And so our windows, the things we've put inside their environments, they need to not pose so much harm to them as they do. So it's our duty to protect them. It matters because we need to find easy ways for people to implement these solutions so that we can reduce bird deaths, because birds are dying. And if birds are dying, then our ecosystems are going to go out of balance and out of whack, and that won't be good. And this app matters because this will show us that we as individuals can make a difference in conservation. I think that often conservation issues seem so large and so unattainable that people are like, oh, well, someone else will do it. No, this is something that you can do. And this matters because birds depend on us. Birds matter. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I can take those.
Thank you, Hannah. So we have a question or two in the Q&A box. So in an ideal world, after you've implemented things, who do you envision using the app?
That's a really good question. I envision any sort of homeowner or anyone living in a high-rise building or anyone that's just a building occupant in general with windows using it and figuring out what they can do. So this will apply to average citizens, people who've been on the lookout for ways they can help birds, but also people who maybe didn't really care about birds before. But now that the solution has been presented to them and it's not as hard as they thought, they say, oh, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. And also bird watchers in general. I'm sure they would love that.
I think you've started to answer some of this next question and what you're talking about there. Do you think this app could also encourage people just to engage more with birds?
For sure. Yeah, for part of the app, I'm envisioning a sort of social aspect to it, or at least an aspect where people can post their own experiences about implementing these solutions like retrofitted windows and window tape and etc. And so I think it would be really encouraging to people to see that it's attainable and it's not hard. And yeah, so it would encourage people that don't know much about it, and also seeing that birds are being saved, it would be like, well, if birds are being saved, I want to see what birds I'm saving. Maybe let me go bird watching this weekend. Should go see who's out there.
And one last question. In terms of the functionality of the app, do you imagine that it could actually be a way of collecting data into a central resource, a bit like eBird does?
I can definitely see that happening. I don't think it's been on the forefront of my mind yet for this research, but that's not far off at all from what we can be doing with the app. I think we're only really just beginning with our options here. So that's a really great point.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Our next presentation is actually a joint presentation by 3 students, Aline Din, Melissa Makuna, and Grace Breitenbeck. They're presenting on engaging William & Mary students in real-world conservation and social justice at Highland. The partners include Highland stakeholders, and the Council of Descendant Advisors. The faculty and staff members include Sarah Harper, Dan Crystal, and Erica Garut.
Hello, my name is Melissa McCuna, and I am here with Grace Breidenbeck and Eileen Den to discuss our proposal for an integrative conservation laboratory at Highland, formerly known as Ashlawn. Highland is a 535-acre property in Charlottesville, Virginia. It was the former plantation of President Monroe, who owned the land from 1793 to 1825, and served as President of the United States from 1817 to 1825. James Monroe enslaved up to 250 people throughout his life, many of whom labored at Highland. The former president sold the deed in 1820, and after a variety of owners, the estate was donated to William and Mary in 1974. Highland is owned and maintained by the school, but operates with a largely autonomous staff headed by Director Sarah Harper. There are tours and nature walks available to the public throughout the property and some agricultural activities, but over 500 acres of land remains relatively underutilized. We are developing this proposal to assess William and Mary's current involvement with Highland and create ways to bolster Highland's position as a public and academic asset to students, faculty, staff, and the greater Charlottesville community. Our goal is to create a center for place-based learning at Highland so that students can get immersed in real-world applications and conversations within environmental justice, education, and conservation.
These are two quotes from William and Mary's website that I think really pair well with our project. In this project, we will be reflecting on the lessons of history through a lens of sustainability and social justice. We seek to address the challenges facing our world while fostering an environment of inclusivity and lifelong learning. Hi everyone, my name is Grace Breitenbeck and I'm a biology major, history minor here at William and Mary. We first want to give a special thanks to our conservation partners, Highland and the Highland Council of Descendant Advisors, as well as the rest of our team, Erica Garut, Dr. Dan Crystal, and Dr. Sarah Harper. My focus on this project is expanding education at Highland. I'm really excited about the potential to offer a broad range of opportunities to students of all ages and walks of life. In my William & Mary admissions essay, I had to answer the question of what makes me quirky or unique. I think my opening line was, "I love old things." I wrote about my love of antiques and how I can spend hours lost in an antique store. For me, that is where history comes alive. Learning should be an experience, and I am so excited to help Highland become a hub for experiential learning. Currently, Highland has significant programming and educational opportunities for the local community and visitors to the plantation. I'll give you a few examples. Annually, they participate in Historic Garden Week in partnership with the Virginia Garden Club. They offer a special day for homeschool kids to visit Highland in conjunction with the Home Educators Association of Virginia. And they work with the Virginia Festival of the Book to host a book talk on a subject related to James Monroe. Highland has hosted field trips for K-12 students and now offers virtual programming for school groups. Programming is also available for adult groups. The Highland website offers information about the plantation's history, including biographies of known slaves. A major challenge facing Highland is its distance from the main hub of William and Mary life. Many students don't know of our connection or have misperceptions about our relationship with Highland. We want to strengthen the bond between Highland and our students and integrate Highland into the larger tribe community. Within the past year, we have started this process. There's an undergraduate class taught by 2 Mellon Foundation postdoctoral fellows, which uses Highland as a model for other historic sites. And there's also a student-led group focused on Highland. We hope to build on this momentum and improve communication between all of these groups. Our educational objectives are primarily focused on tightening the relationship between Highland and William & Mary students and faculty, offering resources for Albemarle County residents and students, and turning Highland into a model for experiential place-based learning. We are currently working on identifying the many stakeholders with an interest in Highland. We want to create programs that people want and are relevant and respectful to the history of the plantation and the people who lived and worked there. Going forward, we hope to engage these stakeholders in conversations to get their ideas. So far, I've identified at least 12 groups that I want to reach out to, ranging from master gardeners to local public schools and, of course, our tribe community. We will take all of the input and create an initial proposal for programming at Highland, taking care to get feedback every step of the way. We have thrown around a couple ideas about what an extended educational program at Highland could look like. Imagine a Call 300 course that brings Highland into the William & Mary classroom and takes students to Highland for place-based learning. Imagine a hands-on research-based student internship at Highland, or an open class series for the local community. Based on stakeholder feedback, these ideas will change and develop, but I know whatever they end up looking like will be amazing because Highland is a place full of opportunities. This Highland team does not view education as something that only happens in the classroom, nor as something that is only for students. We believe in lifelong learning and want to make Highland an inclusive place for all types of learning and all types of learners.
My name is Eileen Din, and I'm kind of tackling the sustainability portion of this project. So one of the pillars of William & Mary, the William & Mary experience and identity, is the idea of boldness. And with each problem that faces the world, we as William & Mary students and faculty, of course, fiercely seek bold solutions to these problems. And of course, it's no secret that we're facing an environmental crisis and so many crises around the world. And in this rapidly changing world, it's really important that we invest in solutions that are bold and that we push the envelope in order to meaningfully learn from the past and forge a better future. So as I explore the ways in which environmental sustainability can be integrated into the future of Highland, both as an independent concept and as something that complements the other aspects of our proposal. Sustainability is defined by the William & Mary community, or the William & Mary Sustainability Committee, as the dynamic interactions between society and the environment, both natural and human-driven, operating in ways that improve the well-being of it all. A mindset that recognizes the connectivity and intersectionality of the whole picture. This proposal seeks to address the future of Highland by looking at the whole picture and approach that future through the lens of sustainability and recognize the inherent connection to education and social justice. So currently at Highland, there are several kind of ongoing initiatives that relate to environmental sustainability. For instance, the Highland Bee Project is a volunteer-driven project that relies on funds from donations, but it's designed to support the stressed bee populations in the area. So it's a really cool thing that's going on at Highland that kind of teaches the visitors about this is why the bees are struggling, this is why we need to save the bees. And then the other big thing is their rustic trails, which is a way to engage the community in the importance of the environment, and it's a way to let people explore the land and see the beauty that Highland has to offer. So as we look to the future of Highland, we want to make sure that we are capitalizing on the projects they already have and what they're already doing, and try to expand the best we can in ways that, again, are inclusive and are taking this integrative approach. So I think one of the things we've all learned as we've been doing this research on Highland is that there are truly so many opportunities. And as we go through this process, we're going to keep learning new things, and it's going to be very fluid in how our plan changes over time. But what we want to do with our proposal is demonstrate why this is somewhere that is worth investing our time in and investing our resources in, because it is this place that has so much potential to be a center for experiential learning for all learners from all different backgrounds and all different places. So, you know, by integrating these crucial social justice initiatives within the lens of sustainability and the lens of education, we can really maximize our impact as a team and as a school. So, you know, the opportunities really aren't limited, but, you know, we could install solar panels and help to meet the goal set forth by William and Mary to reach carbon neutrality, and, you know, provide some energy to the area. There is so much environmental research that can be done there, and that would really complement Grace's aspect of the project as well, with the educational opportunities that are at Highland. Additionally, there are agricultural opportunities, and the UVA has a property right next door called Morven, where they're already running a farm. So, you know, we could team up with them. They're definitely a stakeholder in our project. The agricultural aspect of this project could also lend itself to the environmental justice part that we're going to discuss next with Melissa, because it could help mitigate food insecurity in the area, or we could form partnerships with local businesses and try to boost the local economy there. So there really are just a lot of opportunities in Highland, and it's a really exciting place to invest our time. And especially as we look at the symbolism of this property that holds so much history and is so closely tied to the framework of our nation and the framework of our school, it really is somewhere where we can go and we can reflect on how we got here as a country and where we can go next and all that lies before us.
Hi again, my name is Melissa Mukuna, and I am a current sophomore, and I am a declared government major and hoping to declare a theater double major. And as Eileen said before, my contribution to the project will be investigating opportunities for environmental and social justice at Highland. In our efforts to maintain the biodiversity of the Highland facility, we all feel that we have a really interesting opportunity to also work to use Highland as a place of community engagement and public support for William and Mary students, but also the Charlottesville community and the public at large. I'm looking forward to our work on developing a hub for supporting the environment and its residents in tandem. So Highland, as the second oldest school in the nation and one of Virginia's colonial schools, William and Mary, not Highland, is an institution whose history is ongoing and ever-changing. The narrative of the school is not fully defined in our place in our nation's history, but is constantly referring to it as a foundation of who we were in order to know who we can be in the future. Highland has a similar past and the same possibilities. Efforts to document the lives of everyone involved in Highland serves to provide a necessary snapshot of the past so we can better understand Highland's place in the present and how it can benefit larger groups of people in the future. As it stands, Highland is a very public-facing property, which is a very big asset. There are opportunities to visit its historic core, take tours, and enjoy the many community events that it holds throughout the year. Furthermore, efforts are made to connect to the public throughout its website, where people can find out about the history of its notable residents, alongside current archaeological research being done at the property. The board at Highland is in constant and close discussion with Highland's Council of Descendant Advisors, pictured here, whose ancestors were enslaved on the property. This project will focus, among other things, on finding ways to formalize a relationship between William and Mary and the advisors, and give the council increased administrative responsibilities at Highland, since they already have such a strong working relationship with Director Bon Harper and the staff at Highland today as it is. Highland's history includes Monroe, but this history is also the history of the enslaved African Americans on the property, and this is a history that Highland, its website, and its staff seeks to illuminate and show and teach to the public at every chance that they get. We only wish to expand these options and directly give back to descendant communities and local residents so that Highland can serve as an environmental, academic, and social asset. Our objectives for this piece are as follows: to establish a firm administrative relationship between the Council of Descendant Advisors, Highland, and William & Mary, to use Highland's position as a public property to open up connections between itself and the local community in an educational and socially beneficial manner, to fulfill a role in the reparations bill recently passed by the Virginia State Assembly, either educationally, financially, but hopefully both, to work in conjunction with UVA in sustainability work with a focus on helping local and marginalized communities, particularly in food insecurity, as Eileen mentioned earlier, and to connect environmental sustainability, historical research, and social justice in a meaningful way. The major stakeholders that are involved in this project, who we are in constant communication with, are the Council of Descendant Advisors, but we also hope to talk with the program director at Morven, community outreach groups in Charlottesville, and local food banks. And as ever, we also wish to be in constant communication with students on the ways they can get involved in Highland, along with the tribe community at large.
Our proposal strives to embody the approach of integrative conservation and align ourselves with the university's values and commitment to lifelong learning. We believe that by focusing on environmental justice, sustainability, and education, we can make Highland somewhere that can serve as a model for other historic properties, as well as become a center of learning for the area. Sorry, I lost my place. The challenges set forth by the world have consistently been met by William & Mary throughout time, and it's our time to do that now. And we think by investing in Highland and working toward understanding our past and meaningfully learning from our past and working toward a better future that's both environmentally sustainable and socially just, we can meet these challenges. So thank you all for being here today and listening to our proposal.
Great job, all of you. Thank you, Melissa, Eileen, Grace. So we have a question in the Q&A. So you're writing this proposal for Highland. Who do you feel is your audience for that proposal?
I think we can have a broad audience, but ideally we would love to kind of push this proposal on to the Board of Visitors and the kind of larger William & Mary administration so that we can really get the ball rolling and really enact change and get the ideas of this proposal that, you know, the stakeholders have had all of this input, or they will have this input, and take all of these ideas that we will have come up with and actually turn them into action.
Good answer, very smart answer. Now you're working as a team, and you've all got sort of different backgrounds, different majors, and you're also working with lots of different groups of stakeholders. I wondered if one or two of you could reflect on the complexities of working in that kind of a team atmosphere, both in terms of the positive elements and maybe in terms of any sort of challenges that you felt in working with a team and with so many people that you need to interact with.
Melissa, you go ahead.
I would say for me personally, I think that all of us coming from a wide variety of different educational backgrounds has been a real asset, just in that we all bring so many ideas to the table, certainly ones that I perhaps couldn't have been able to come up with by myself. And that was really helpful in us in being able to establish these 3 poles to focus on, just because in the beginning we had such a broad range of ideas and possibilities that each of us being able to focus on different avenues for Highland that we had a stronger personal connection to, but still being able to, through constant communication, weave that together into a cohesive proposal has been really rewarding, and something I don't think we'd be able to do had we worked on this proposal by ourselves or completely individually.
Excellent, that's really great to hear that's working, that you're getting synergy from each other. Eileen, were you going to say something in response to? Looks like you were.
Yeah, I mean, my response was along the same lines. I mean, I think, of course, like with any team, project or group project, it's hard to sometimes coordinate, whether it's timing wise or who's going to answer on a Zoom call. But I think it's been really ultimately rewarding, like Melissa said, because it's really cool to collaborate and kind of see each other's blind spots and always have someone else's perspective that you can go to talk about an idea. And like I said, it's a big project, so there's a lot of people to talk to and a lot of opinions to get. So having teammates is really nice.
There's one question in the Q&A, if we could have a quick answer to this. What advantages do you see in remote learning to breach the distance between Highland and the main Williamsburg campus?
I think that, this past year and a half has really prepared us to be comfortable with remote learning. And I think that that's going to be a real asset, especially initially for us to engage students at Highland without having to have, complex living situations or transportation going on. I think that being able to pull in Highland in a remote sense will be a great stepping stone towards having more in-person events for William and Mary students actually physically at Highland.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa, Eileen, Grace.
Thank you all for that wonderful presentation. Up next, we have Allison Walsh. Allison presenting her work on developing a William and Mary Sustainability Toolkit. The partner is the Office of Sustainability here at William and Mary, and the faculty and staff members are John Swaddle and Calandra Waters-Lake.
People cannot be called to action without a clear understanding of where to begin. Hello, my name is Allison Walsh. I'm a junior at the college and I'm double majoring in environmental science and American studies. And today I'm going to be discussing my project, the William and Mary Sustainability Toolkit. First, I would just like to thank my mentor, Professor John Swaddle, and my conservation partner, Calandra Waters-Lake. So as we all know, climate change is one of the most pressing issues in our world today. In higher education, however, we have the unique opportunity to be leaders in environmental, economic, and social sustainability. In 2007, William & Mary received a D- for sustainability by the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, also known as ASHE. The last time we were assessed by ASHE in 2016, we received a silver award. So while this is a significant improvement, there is still a need for widespread behavior and mindset change. Currently, William & Mary has a strong sustainability plan launched in the fall of 2018. So this plan is actionable on a university level, but there is a need for action among individual units, which refers to offices and departments on campus. So there's a gap between knowledge about climate change and subsequent mitigating actions. But if units are given a place to begin and clear steps to improve their sustainable practices, hopefully that knowledge behavior gap will narrow. So our sustainability plan has a commitment to create a green office program that recognizes units for their sustainability progress. But with this toolkit, we will be exceeding that goal by creating a more interactive, sustainable action plan rather than a stagnant checklist or simply recognizing people. So before I discuss my methods, here are my project objectives. First, create the prototype for a sustainability toolkit and beta test it on the IIC. Second, operationalize our current sustainability plan for offices and departments. Next, foster a sustainable mindset on campus by providing behavior changes at an office and departmental level. And lastly, empower and educate our campus units on their role in university sustainability. So the first aspect of the toolkit I'll be making this summer will be a sustainability self-assessment for units to take before creating their sustainability plan. This assessment will result in a score for their success in 4 categories that align with the categories that the William & Mary Sustainability Plan is organized by. And these categories are operations, curriculum and research, community engagement, and administration and planning. So the score will merely be a jumping off point for when they create their plan. And the second aspect of the toolkit will be the planning process itself, which will probably be the largest part of the toolkit. This will be split into the aforementioned categories, and how units navigate this section will largely be based on their results from the assessment. So they'll have access to tips, best practices, actions, resources, and information in each category, but I'm assuming they will be focusing initially on the one or two categories that they needed the most improvement in. So lastly, the units will be provided with tools for launching their plan into action. And after I create the initial toolkit, as I mentioned before, we will be beta testing it on the IIC to see what was successful and what I'll need to improve. And then hopefully it will eventually become a web page on the William & Mary website. So in conclusion, the sustainability toolkit I am creating will provide campus units with the tools to create a unique sustainability plan that aligns with their specific goals and needs. In doing so, we will be elevating William & Mary's environmental, economic, and social sustainability that will hopefully bring us closer to achieving university goals. That being said, this toolkit will extend beyond campus, as we will be giving people in our community sustainable behaviors in their everyday lives, which will inevitably be brought outside of the William & Mary campus. For sustainable behavior to become a social norm, we need to possess the tools for action. Thank you for your time.
Very nicely done, Alison. So in terms of questions, we've got something in the Q&A box. Can you give us an illustrative example that lets us see how one might use the toolkit for a particular problem?
So I was thinking it would more be a general thing instead of for a particular problem, but we're thinking the assessment will be done on Qualtrics. So that will be what results in a score, and each of the categories, it will say what they scored high in and what they didn't. And then the toolkit will be like align with that, and it'll give them tips to like elevate their score in each category, if that makes sense. So it's more of a general sustainability action plan rather than mitigating one problem, but it'll mitigate multiple problems, hopefully.
Great. Rob, I think you have a question.
I do, thanks. I apologize, I can't type them into the Q&A. Thank you for that presentation. It's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of this. I'm curious, with a sustainability plan like this, how much influence do you have over sort of external problems? And one that I think of is the use of plastic. It's everywhere. I know I've tried to reduce my plastic use, and it's really hard. So I wonder how you engage a topic like that that's so tied to external forces leading the charge and kind of directing how we approach internal actions.
So I'm hoping that with our internal actions, it'll help external problems in our world. So with things like plastic, I'm hoping the procurement office, I'll be able to meet with them this summer, and hopefully they'll use the toolkit too and learn more about the effects of plastic, and in doing so, they will change their procurement services, and hopefully in their like daily lives at home too, they can mitigate that and use less plastic, to use your example.
Excellent, thanks, Alison.
And one last question, Alison, from the Q&A box. Can you please tell us more about how you plan to engage the broader community outside of William & Mary on sustainability for behavior change? Do you think there's a role for that community engagement as you develop this toolkit?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. I'm actually a sustainability intern for the dining halls here, and we've actually, in having sustainability interns, we've formed partnerships with Kelray Farms, which is a farm in Toano, about 30 minutes away. And that's been boosting their business and helping us bring more local foods to our dining halls. So I feel like in like going through the process of becoming more sustainable, you're inevitably going to be interacting with different parts of the community that are already doing things like that.
Wonderful job, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our last presentation, this is going to be a recorded presentation. Tara Vasanth couldn't join us today. So Tara recorded their presentation on empathetic education, developing curriculum that improves students' understanding of the interconnectedness with the environment and communities through the perspectives of indigenous peoples of the Javari territory of Brazil. The partner is the Javari Project and Celine Cousteau, who will be here talking about this project next week, or will be on Zoom talking about the project next week. And the faculty mentor is Catherine Lanoette from the Education Department. So give me 1 second and I'll launch the video.
Hi everyone, my name is Tara Vasanth, a double major in art history and environmental policy. I'm excited to share with you my research project focusing on the connection between the indigenous experiences and rights of the Marubo tribe in the Brazilian Amazon and conservation education. To begin, I'd like to start by giving you some important figures. Indigenous people make up 4% of the global population, but they nurture 80% of the world's biodiversity on their land. One of the most biodiverse regions in the world is the Brazilian Amazon, which is home to many different indigenous groups and hosts the highest concentration of uncontacted communities in the world. Our project will focus on the Marubo tribe that resides in the Javari territory of the rainforest. Indigenous peoples currently face massive threats to the survival of their native land and therefore the survival of their own people. Some of these threats include deforestation and lack of adequate health care. It is important to bridge the geographical and cultural gap between our world and theirs in order to help save their home. In addition to environmental concerns, the indigenous peoples of the Javari territory are also facing political and cultural pressures. Beto Marubo, a representative of the Union of Indigenous Peoples of the Javari Valley, warns that indigenous people in the Amazon face existential threats from rising deforestation, anti-environment, and anti-indigenous policies from the Bolsonaro administration and the COVID-19 pandemic. Encroachment of their land by the government's natural resource extraction and development campaigns will result in the collapse of the Amazon rainforest ecosystem, which could spell disaster for the rest of the world, since the Amazon has the richest biodiversity and has the largest drainage basin. Again, it is vital to establish a connection between our world and the indigenous communities of the Amazon, since our survival ultimately hinges on theirs. The image you see on the right is of Beto Marubo, a representative of the indigenous peoples of the Javari Valley and a powerful advocate for indigenous rights. He is eager to tell the world about his people's plight. He reached out to filmmaker and passionate environmentalist Celine Cousteau to create a stirring documentary called Tribes on the Edge that would shed light on the environmental and cultural challenges that the indigenous peoples of the Javari Valley face. Beto is calling upon the outside world to pressure the Bolsonaro administration to protect indigenous rights, lands, and livelihoods. He's asking for 3 things specifically. Number 1, for the Brazilian government to evict land invaders from indigenous territories. Number 2, restrictions on outsiders' access to indigenous lands. And number 3, logistical and medical support. Celine, acting upon this request, is leveraging her skills as a storyteller and filmmaker to share their story in an attempt to aid in their fight for their rights as guardians and, in turn, help the global community better understand our interconnectedness and the importance of protecting indigenous community rights for us all. There's a lack of educational content that focuses on the role of indigenous communities in conservation and the interconnectedness of societies to the environment at the local and global scale. Supporting Beto and the Marubo tribe in their efforts to share their story requires that we embed their perspectives and experiences into the foundational education of conservation and societies. To truly support Beto and the indigenous communities in their fight for their rights as guardians of globally important ecosystems, we need to apply this idea of interconnectedness and education so that the indigenous rights and the relationship of societies with the environment can guide and shape our understanding of our role in conservation. As such, Celine is partnering with the IIC and William & Mary School of Education to develop a curriculum that encourages students in understanding their interconnectedness through the perspectives of the indigenous communities of the Jvari Territory. With support from Celine, who is working closely with Beto and the indigenous communities of the Jvari Territory, and Dr. Catherine Lanouette of William & Mary School of Ed, I am taking the lead in developing a curriculum that will help raise global awareness about the importance of indigenous communities in global conservation and our interconnectedness at both local and global scales. Using the film as inspiration, we have partnered with Celine to create a 5-lesson educational curriculum for 9 to 12-year-old students to learn about conservation through the perspectives and philosophies of the indigenous people of the Brazilian Amazon. Kids, especially 9 to 12-year-old kids, have an incredible ability to absorb knowledge, make connections, and apply it to their own lives. Because of the massive learning potential of this amazing age group, we believe that teaching them about conservation and cultural interconnectedness with the environment and with communities, both locally and globally, is a promising way to ensure that newer generations can support environmental causes and help build a sustainable future for everyone. But why 9 to 12-year-old kids, you ask? What's special about this age group is that students are now at an intellectual stage where they are more receptive to learning about different points of view, cultures, and epistemologies. We will help give them a new lens to explore their role in the international community. By developing a curriculum centered around the experiences of the indigenous communities of the Jvari Territory, I hope to achieve the following 2 objectives. Number 1, build a curriculum for 9 to 12-year-olds that supports students' understanding of interconnectedness centered on the perspectives of the Marubo tribe of the Jvari Territory. Number 2, through a literature review and pilot of this curriculum, explore best practices in curriculum design that supports students' understanding of interconnectedness. The ultimate goal is to use this curriculum and this project to explore best practices for broadening students' knowledge of conservation and how to foster respect for indigenous narratives and different ways of knowing, and the essential role of indigenous communities in conservation. But how are we going to go about it exactly? Well, we are eager to use the power of empathetic storytelling to help students understand interconnectedness between us and the world around us. Firstly, I will conduct a literature review on best practices in curriculum design for improving students' understanding of conservation, indigenous perspectives, and active listening skills. Secondly, using findings from the literature review, I will develop 5 lessons that will explore interconnectedness through the views of the Marubo tribe using video and other media. Lastly, we will pilot the lessons in the fall to evaluate the effectiveness of the lessons in meeting our objectives, and will use this to improve the lessons and to inform broader literature around best practices in integrative curriculum design. By showing kids how indigenous communities live sustainably, we hope that they can learn how to live sustainably in their own communities as well, and that the ultimate goal of this curriculum is to show that we are truly all in this together. Well, unfortunately, since this is a recording, I cannot take your questions right now, but please feel free to reach out if you do have any questions. I'd be more than happy to answer them over email or even in person. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I really am excited to see what happens with this project. Thank you.
Excellent. And so that was our last presentation for the day. We do have a few more slides just to finish up with. We hope you could stick around for these. Let me just jump back to the slideshow and share that. Just getting my notes ready. We just want to thank all the mentors and conservation partners that are involved with this student conservation research program. This program is successful because of those people that put their time into this and support the students through these efforts. We also want to thank the students for their incredible presentations today and look forward to working with them over the summer and into the fall on developing these projects. John?
And then we're going to wrap up with a few messages about this research program and events and ways in which you can get involved with the Institute for Integrative Conservation. So first off, students who did a wonderful job, absolutely fantastic. And also thank you to the attendees, especially for the questions and for the interactions and for the feedback. Student research is the foundation of what we're doing here at the IIC, and it's the foundation of the curriculum that we're building to as well. All of the projects are designed to support conservation on the ground and advancing real-world conservation solutions. This was only half of what the IIC is doing right now in terms of student research projects, and the other half will be on Friday. And those are projects that have a strong focus on GIS. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. So the goal for this program is to engage students in a suite of interdisciplinary projects that are improving actual conservation outcomes. They're helping students build a diverse skill set. And we're also trying to reach a broad diversity of students, as I hope that you've seen through the students that presented today. To date, we've engaged over 40 students in this program. 15 in particular are in this student research program, and all of them represent different academic units in various ways or another. Next slide. So we're looking to broaden the network with the IIC. And in particular, we're looking for partners for more research projects. So those could be people from conservation NGOs, government agencies, private corporations, local communities, tribal communities and governments. Anyone who has an on-the-ground conservation need, we would love to hear from you, because there may be ways in which we can involve your needs in the project goals of what the students are doing in the student research program. So we want to co-design projects, and what we do is we co-design those projects on an annual cycle, where in the fall of one year, we reach out, we find what those conservation needs are, and then we advertise those once we shorten the list down. And we are looking for faculty mentors to be involved in those projects too as well, because we want to broaden our internal network as well and have more faculty across different departments and schools collaborating with these students and the external conservation partners to then reach conservation solutions. So faculty themselves are also welcome to submit proposals for projects, as long as they're addressing real life, real world conservation needs in some form. The application period for the students starts in October of each year. We will put out the advert, the call, and then students will respond to that. And then students start in the program in January, and in that spring semester, they develop a proposal. And that's exactly what you've seen today. This is towards the end of the spring semester, and students are developing the proposal for the summer work, where they will do the meat of the project. And then in the fall, they will continue that project and communicate out their findings and wrap things up. So if you'd like to hear more about that, please email us and also sign up for the IIC listserv, which you can find on our website. I think Kathy is putting some links up there for signing up with our listserv. Next slide. So we're developing, other than the research program, we're developing an integrated conservation curriculum internally within William & Mary. We've just heard yesterday that we've had a minor approved in integrative conservation. So starting next academic year, students can get a degree in integrated conservation through the IIC. We're also helping several students self-design a major in integrative conservation. Within the next couple of years, we expect to be launching a standalone major in conservation as well. In particular, in fall 2021, we have several new courses out there for students to enroll in. We have 2 wonderful incoming faculty members. One will be offering a course in environmental justice and the other in conservation ethics. Rob is offering a new class in Intro to Conservation GIS to get people on that path. And there are new courses in One Health that Erica is co-teaching with Iyaba Obasanjo in kinesiology and health sciences. And we also have the conservation practicum research experiences. So for any of those, if you want more details, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone, and you can email us generally at this iic@wm.edu email address. Next slide. So please sign up for the listserv. The link is already there in the chat. And subscribe to, if you subscribe to the listserv, you'll receive regular emails from us as well as our newsletters. So you'll hear about all different kinds of events. And we're looking for more participation from the community. Particularly, we'd love to hear from more alumni, from faculty, from parents, anyone who's interested in proposing a project to us, or perhaps even serving as a mentor for a student research project as well. You can also follow us on social media, on Instagram and on LinkedIn. So this also helps us build the IIC network through connections through social media as well, through the listserv and email. So reach out to us with any ideas for any forms of collaboration. We're eager to hear from you. Next slide. Another way that we're communicating about the IIC is through the podcast series, which you heard Anne Turner talk about earlier. She's putting together the second series. The first season, Multiple Ways of Knowing, Past, Present, and Future, is already up on Google, on Spotify and Google Podcasts, so you can listen to that. And Anne's series on gender in conservation will be up in the fall. So hopefully you can tune into that and learn a little bit more about how these issues are impacting conservation globally. Next slide. So we'll finish with re-advertising a couple of different events. The second half of the student research program is happening on Friday. This is for students who have a focus on GIS in particular. This is hosted by the Center for Geospatial Analysis. And we'll put the registration link in the chat. I think Kathy just did that, flashing up there. So if you want to hear more, especially GIS projects, please tune in for that. There's a couple of keynote speakers and also some alumni who are coming back to talk to as well as panelists within that whole symposium. Next slide. And then as a sort of final event that we want to advertise to revisit this sustainability symposium that several of the student speakers talked about too as well. So next week on April 20th and 21st, we're very lucky to have two incredible keynote speakers, Celine Christou and Winona LeDuc, who'll be talking about their own work and the ways in which they're integrating different aspects of social justice into sustainability and related to conservation. So please register for that event. And I think Kathy has put up the link for registration for that sustainability symposium too as well. So thank you for attending. It's been a wonderful event. Thank you to the students again. Thank you to the mentors who've helped all these students. And thank you to the attendees who have given us great questions and feedback for the students to think about. Rob, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we sign off?
Thanks everybody for coming today. We appreciate you joining us today and look forward to seeing you at future events.